What's your favorite Bible verse? That's a question that I came to know and to fear in talking to my kids when they were younger and they went to a very conservative Protestant summer camp for a week or two every summer, for a number of summers. Turns out the Protestants do things a little differently than the Catholics do. And the Protestants are very into memorizing favorite Bible passages. For God so loved the world, he gave his only son. That's not how I was raised. I was raised Catholic through stories. And my favorite story is, and I've got a cheat sheet, Mark 8, 22 through 26. That's my favorite story. I don't remember it as that. The way I remember it as the miracle Jesus performed on the blind man that he made a mistake on. Now, I've since learned that different people teach that story a little differently. So that's all I'm going to say about. I'm not going to use the M word, the mistake word, because apparently that's a whole thing between the Catholics and I guess some Protestants. But that's the story where Jesus is approached by a blind man and he spits on the ground, gets some mud, puts it into two little balls, and then smushes the balls on the eyes of the blind man. And then the scales, the clay, falls off the blind man's eyes. But the interesting thing is, instead of being immediately healed, the man instead says, well, I can see now, but everything looks like trees. So Jesus does it over again. He spits on the ground, gets some clay, makes two little balls, smushes them on the man's eyes. They fall off, and now the man can see. I always loved that story because to me it showed Jesus as a completely human person, M word and all. And the fact that just like me, he didn't always get things right the first time, I took a lot of encouragement from that. The other reason I remember that story is the person who taught it to us, and when and how. And that was Father Dolan, Father Timothy Dolan. Now Cardinal Timothy Dolan, or I guess technically it's Timothy Cardinal Dolan. He came to Immaculata in the late summer of 1976, basically straight out of the seminary. Came to Immaculata in Richmond Heights, Missouri, which is a suburb of St. Louis. Glasses, military kind of glasses, dark, but a jolly guy. Bigger but not huge at that point. But he obviously liked kids. Now he was busy. We didn't see him very much. We would see him at Mass. We went to Mass every morning and he would be there pretty much every day to give out communion. But then I assume he went off to work or something, and we never saw him, or we rarely saw him in the school. And it turns out there was a whole thing between the priests going into the school, but that's a whole other thing. But I do remember, and this would be third grade, either the fall of 76 or the spring of 77. That must have been the reading that Mark 8, 22 to 26, check my cheat sheet, yeah. That must have been the reading for the day. That must have been the miracle for the day. So technically you could actually probably date that, since all the readings run in cycles. Someone could probably figure out exactly when that Mass took place. But I remember So we heard that story at Mass, and then it's probably in the early afternoon for religion class, Father Dolan came up and we spent some time talking about that story and the miracle and why Jesus did what he did and why he did it, how he did it. And I remember that in particular because Father Dolan asked two of us to act it out. And I was chosen to play Jesus, and one of the girls, I think it was Becky, she was chosen to play the blind person. And I remember acting it out, and so we did it. So Father Dolan took the two of us out in the hall, and he said, "All right, you guys remember the story?" And we were like, "Yes." So then we did it, and so I pretended, and I got the mud, and I put it on the eyes, and the things fell off, and she's like, "All I see are trees," and I'm like, "Uh-oh." Kind of sold that line. And then we did it again. But that's my first memory of a priest, and I've always loved that memory, and I've always loved that passage and that miracle and the way Jesus performed that miracle, and all, as a result of that. And that's why what I'm going to talk about now is so difficult. In the fall of, probably late summer of 1977, Father Leroy Valentine came to Immaculata in Richmond Heights, Missouri, which is a suburb of St. Louis. And Father Valentine was also interested in kids, but whereas Father Dolan was off somewhere, I assume he was down at working down at the Archdiocese or studying or something. He basically just lived at Immaculata and would help out with the 8 a.m. Mass, whenever it was, and then he would go down to work wherever he went. So for him to be around in an afternoon was actually kind of a big deal, which is one of the reasons why I remember. But so Father Valentine showed up. Father Valentine was similarly friendly, also had glasses, but Father Valentine liked boys. And he really liked boys, and he liked to hang around with boys. And I never thought anything about it. Apparently people were talking about it, but nobody ever told me. But so then Father Valentine would start hanging out, but mostly, I think he started with the altar boys, but then he would also, I remember hanging out with him one evening, and I've told this story in other places, about he had 4 of us over to play Risk in the rectory and eat pizza and drink real Coke and not RC Cola or Vess or Shasta Cola. Oh, and we also got a whole can, which is a big deal, because when I was at home, my 2 brothers and I would split a can of Vess. So having a whole can of Coke all to yourself was a big deal. And as I've talked about in other places, Father Valentine would, with that party, which happened in probably, late October, early November 1977, started a process of testing and then grooming us in preparation for abuse. And Valentine would, he would do things like, have us one at a time. He would bring us into the TV room when we would watch TV with him, and we'd be lying down, or the boys would be lying down. But one of the things that Valentine would do is that, I think kind of the next stage in the testing process was he would take boys up to his room. I've talked about the direct message I received from a guy who was a couple of years older than me on the day that the Aisha Sultan piece ran in late April 2018, in which he told me about what he experienced with Father Valentine. And I had similar experiences, and I'm quite sure that something similar happened to me, and that wasn't, that was mostly a testing thing and a grooming thing, but there was also some abuse involved, and I've figured that out based on compulsions, sexual compulsions, that kind of stuff that happen certain times of the year, especially when my parents are gone. Valentine was really good at knowing when your parents were going to be out of town. But one thing I've always wondered, and I figured out today when I was just kind of driving around, one of the reasons why the stuff that Father Valentine would do, he would take guys up to the room. One guy said it was a haircut, but I don't remember that because I don't remember any haircut equipment. I just remember sitting on the bed, sitting on the end of the bed. The door would be open, but Father Valentine, we would be sitting on the bed and talking, and he would have one hand in my hair, kind of playing with my hair, and then another hand on my leg, and his hand would slip, and when I talked to the Archdiocesan Review team in May 9, 2011, the word I used was ambivalent. And one of the reasons that I used that word was because I liked the physical contact, because my dad, his generation, wasn't raised to give physical contact. They were told it was coddling or it was unmasculine. So my dad wasn't a hugger. So I kind of craved physical attention, especially from males. But so I would like the words that Father Valentine would say, but I didn't like what he was doing to me. And he did the same thing in the rectory, or in the back of the church, in the sacristy after church. I've talked about special training, and this is, I would be doing chores and he would be supervising me, and he would have one hand in my hair and he would be talking to me, and then he would have the other hand down there. But one of the reasons why that wasn't a bigger deal for me was because on certain occasions, Father Dolan, now Cardinal Timothy Dolan, would be around in the rectory, and he would see it. He would see what was going on. He would see Valentine testing, grooming, in my case, and I think others, sexually exploiting, if not abusing, boys, touching. It wasn't rape, but he'd be touching us, and it created problems. I have a huge problem with being touched in pretty much any context. But the fact that Father Dolan would be around, and he was such an awesome guy, and I think everybody knew that he was on the bishop track or something. He was in bishop school or something. I didn't know what that meant, but some of my friends who knew things figured that he was on, he was going to bishop school or something. And it was just a big deal, and it was a privilege to have Father Dolan living in the rectory. And the fact that Father Dolan knew what Father Valentine was doing with us and to us made it less of a big deal for me. Because, Father V he was huggy, but Father Dolan saw it, and he was cool, and he knew what was what, and he wouldn't let anything happen to us. I'm still piecing this together, but I'm starting to figure stuff out and remember stuff based on memories and triggers and what is difficult for me. I don't know how much Father Dolan saw. I know he saw some stuff. Father Valentine would have parties. Valentine would have parties on the weekend in the rectory. Like I said, Risk Night was held in the rectory probably a Friday or Saturday night, 7 or 8 o'clock. I don't remember Dolan being there, but I do remember him being around. He was busy with political stuff and bishopy stuff, or bishop school stuff, or bishop track stuff. But Dolan was around, and he knew. He knew enough. He knew enough. And that's where a lot of the anger and the energy comes from. It's from that sense of betrayal. I trusted Father Dolan to, if he thought what Father Valentine was doing was legit, then obviously it was legit. So in 2002, it was revealed in the New York Times and then the local papers that Father Valentine had multiple allegations against him. And as I said, I called in to the circuit attorney office, Jennifer Joyce. She never called me back. I assumed due to a statute of limitations problem, but now with all the nonsense that's going on with the Missouri Attorney General, I don't know about that. I wonder if there were some shenanigans, some games being played, some favors being done. But in 2002, literally the next day after I called into the Archdiocese hotline, I get a call from by that point, Auxiliary Bishop Dolan, Bishop Timothy Dolan. And he introduced himself. He's like, hey Chris, it's Tim Dolan, Bishop Dolan. Good to talk to you. How you doing? From Immaculata. His whole rap kind of thing. Because I knew him and he knew me and we knew the family and everything. So I told him, 5 or 6 memories of Father Valentine. None of which were really obvious, but all of which seemed to be, in retrospect, followed a progression of grooming and of testing in getting into situations of abuse. And there was one memory that I had coming back from a mud cave that was, in retrospect, it was abuse. I was seated in a car, station wagon, in the passenger seat. Father Valentine was driving. I woke up from a nap, aroused, and I just looked at Father Valentine and he just looked like the devil. I was disgusted and afraid, and my psychologist called it a flash of insight, but that was like literally the first time I had any inkling that something was up with Father Valentine. And that would have been December 26, 1980. So by that time, Bishop Dolan called me. I told him my stories, and he immediately, without any investigation, during the same phone call, said, he told me nothing happened. It didn't mean anything. He told me, and I quote, I was at the seminary with Leroy Valentine. I lived with him at Immaculata. I've known him for years. I know that Leroy Valentine didn't do any of the things that he's accused of. I know that he would never do anything to hurt a child. And that was enough for me. I mean, it was Father, now Bishop Dolan, telling me nothing happened. And his word, this is a guy that people were talking about, how he was on the power track, and they were already talking about him being, Pope material, and maybe he was going to be the first American Pope. And when the guy who could be the first American Pope tells you nothing happened, you believe that nothing happened. But he did say, you know, if you do want to talk to someone, I've got a psychologist that I know that works with us, and I'd be glad to set up something. So I took him up on that. Turned out that he sold her as an independent psychologist, but it turned out, I believe it was Nancy Brown, who was the assistance coordinator for the Archdiocese of St. Louis at the time. But she again told me nothing happened, that my memories didn't mean anything, that I was just misinterpreting things. But that again, so I went on with my life. I had a newborn, like 2 weeks old or something. I didn't think anything had happened. I didn't have any clear memories. Everything was fuzzy. I was doing well in work. So I just moved on. What I didn't know was that a few days later, Father Leroy Valentine, resigned. I think it was March 27th, 2002. And Bishop Dolan, now Cardinal Dolan, originally Father Dolan, he never called me to let me know. To let me know that, hey, you know, I told you nothing happened, and well, it turns out Father Valentine resigned because of maybe 6, maybe 7 allegations of abuse against him. Nobody ever contacted me. You know, it would have been Dolan's job to contact me because he would have been the vicar for priests or vicar for clergy at the time. And he was the person who had talked to me and had told me nothing happened. I never got a call from him. A notice was run in the New York Times, but I didn't read the New York Times regularly. And then I think the only other place that I've found is a piece in the Southeast Missourian, which is down in Cape Girardeau or St. John or something. So I didn't know that Father Valentine had resigned. Turns out I actually know the guy who came forward at the end of March 2002 and forced the resignation. And I didn't learn about that until, just a few months ago, that I didn't know when Valentine resigned. It's like I said, I wasn't notified, and it wasn't made obvious, and you know, Dolan didn't notify me. Regali, I mean, the logical thing for Regali to do, Cardinal Regali, would have been to put out a notice in the media like they did when the New York Times thing came out in early March, like March 2nd, 2002. The Archdiocese put out a statement saying, hey, if people can come forward with any information, that'd be great. What Cardinal Regali should have done, what Bishop Dolan should have done, technically Regali would have been in charge, is they should have put out a similar call saying, hey, Valentine resigned, if anyone's got any information, please come forward. They didn't do that. They didn't do the right thing. And then similarly, when Cardinal Burke took over, Cardinal Raymond Leo Burke took over from Regali about a year or so later. And by that time, Dolan had moved on, and Bishop Rick Sticca had come in as the vicar for priests, basically the fixer role. Neither Burke nor Sticca put out a notice letting people know, okay, Valentine's resigned for cause, so people might want to come forward. I have a lot of anger and a lot of emotion, and it's due to the fact that multi-level betrayal. I trusted Timothy Cardinal Dolan, Father Dolan, Bishop Dolan when I was a kid. Father Valentine was doing stuff, but Cardinal Dolan didn't seem to think it was a big deal. It never stopped. He never put an end to it. He just saw it and kind of moved on. He saw it and he looked the other way, which told me that it was no big deal. Because I'm a kid, I don't know any better. So that's one level of betrayal. And then the even bigger betrayal, and I'm starting to shake. The even bigger betrayal is what happened in March 2002 when I went to then Bishop Dolan for help, saying, can you guys, does this mean anything? I was one of Valentine's favorites. I had a hard time believing that I could have dodged a bullet, but Dolan told me I dodged a bullet. And then nobody notified me when Valentine resigned a few days later, despite all the stories that I had. I told him 5 or 6 stories, which in retrospect, putting on my parents' hat, are just insane that anyone would let a kid do that. There's the whole question of, what were your kids thinking, or what were your parents thinking? It was a big deal to be invited to the rectory. That's what they were thinking. What safer place could there be than the rectory? But so I've got these 2 levels of betrayal by Cardinal Dolan. What happened back in 77, 78, 79, or Dolan ended up leaving. I think it was like 77, 78 before Dolan left. But there was a 2-year overlap there between him and Valentine. And then what happened in March 2002 when he told me nothing happened and then Valentine resigned. That level of betrayal is what energizes me and what I can't get past, and I literally have no idea how to get past it. Telling my story is part of how I'm hoping to get past it. But here's the interesting thing. I've told this story to the New York Times over the course of a number of years multiple times. They've had this story and they've sat on it. And when the scandal about Father Timon and Valentine writing a bogus letter of recommendation for Timon came out, I assumed that my story was soon to follow. Because it's just a pattern, Dolan did this cover-up stuff of abuse in New York. Well, it's logical to then wonder if he did similar things in Milwaukee. I've heard stories from people. And it's similarly logical to wonder if he did things in St. Louis. Once an enabler, once a blind eyer, always a blind eyer. And honestly, that's how you get promoted within the church. You take one for the team, you do the work of the team, you clean up messes. That's the quickest and surest way of securing promotion within the Catholic Church, is to clean up the messes, to shut your mouth, to just get it over with, to solve the problem. Just sweep it under the rug. And I'm quite sure that Timothy Cardinal Dolan owes his position, his status, his stature to what he did in New York, what he did in Milwaukee, and what he did in St. Louis. And the sex abuse crisis in the Catholic Church will not be solved, won't be close to solved, until guys like Timothy Cardinal Dolan are brought to and held to account for the stuff that they did, for the stuff that they didn't do, for the blind eye to abuse that they turned when we were kids, to the gaslighting that they did when we were adults. Until guys like Dolan, Timothy Cardinal Dolan, are held to account and removed, the church can never get beyond the sexual abuse crisis. Period.